The morning of October 25, 1944, begins with what seems like a miracle for Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita. At 0645 hours, his lookouts aboard the battleship Yamato spot masts on the horizon off the coast of Samar Island in the Philippines. The initial reports are confused. Distant shapes, smoke, multiple vessels. Then the identification comes through. American aircraft carriers. For 3 days, Kurita's center force has endured hell. Submarine attacks in Palawan Strait, relentless airstrikes in the Sibuyan Sea. He has lost the super battleship Musashi, sister to the Yamato, watching her take 19 torpedo hits and 17 bombs before finally rolling over and sinking. His force has been battered, turned around, ordered forward again. His men are exhausted. His fuel situation is critical. The mission to destroy the American invasion fleet at Leyte Gulf has seemed increasingly impossible. And now, through a gap in the American defenses that should not exist, he has stumbled directly upon what his intelligence officers are telling him must be fast fleet carriers. The primary targets. The heart of American naval power in the Pacific. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What Kurita does not know, what he cannot know in these first critical minutes, is that the vessels his force is bearing down upon are not fleet carriers at all. They are escort carriers, the smallest, slowest carriers in the United States Navy, converted merchant hulls, designed to escort convoys and provide air support for amphibious landings. Their aircraft are loaded with anti-submarine depth charges and light bombs meant for ground support, not armor-piercing weapons designed to sink battleships. Their maximum speed is 17 knots. The Yamato can make 27 knots even now, after battle damage. The Americans call them jeep carriers, or baby flat tops. Officially, they are CVEs, a designation their crew's joke stands for: combustible, vulnerable, expendable. Kurita has 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. The Yamato alone displaces 72,000 tons and carries 9 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval rifles ever mounted on a warship. A single shell from these guns weighs more than a small car. The Americans facing him have 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. In terms of raw firepower, the disparity is almost obscene. At 0658 hours, Kurita issues the order for a general attack. The Japanese battle line, which had been in cruising formation, begins to maneuver. There is no time for the careful tactical disposition that doctrine demands. No time to form the perfect crossing of the T formation that every naval officer dreams of executing. The Americans have been spotted. They are turning away, launching aircraft. In minutes, those aircraft will be airborne and forming up to strike. In minutes, the carriers might escape into a rain squall visible on the horizon. The order goes out. General attack. All ships attack the enemy carriers. This is the moment. 10 minutes, perhaps less, before the first American aircraft claw into the sky. 10 minutes of what must have seemed like pure opportunity. 10 minutes before everything changes. But to understand what happens in those 10 minutes, and why the battle that follows becomes one of the most extraordinary naval engagements in history, we must first understand who these men are, both the hunters and the hunted, and what has brought them to this particular stretch of ocean off the coast of an island most of them had never heard of before this war began. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita is 55 years old on this October morning. He is a torpedo specialist by training, a veteran of Japan's stunning early victories in the Pacific. He was present at the invasion of Malaya. He commanded cruisers in the East Indies. He led the close support force at the Battle of Midway, though his ships never engaged the enemy there. He has spent 3 years watching the tide of war turn against Japan, watching the industrial power of the United States grind down his navy ship by ship, watching the losses mount and the fuel supplies dwindle and the replacements fail to arrive. He is not a fanatic. His contemporaries describe him as careful, methodical, perhaps overly cautious, but he is also a professional naval officer in an empire that has staked everything on one final gamble. The plan, Operation Show Go. Victory operation is complex to the point of being unwieldy. 3 Japanese forces will converge on Leyte Gulf from different directions. The southern force, under Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura, will come through Surigao Strait from the south. Kurita's center force will transit the San Bernardino Strait and come down from the north. And Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's northern force, built around Japan's last remaining carriers, will act as a decoy, luring Admiral William Halsey's powerful Third Fleet away from the landing beaches. The carriers in Ozawa's force have almost no aircraft. Japan's naval aviation has been gutted. Most of their experienced pilots are dead. The carriers are bait, nothing more. Sacrificial pieces in a chess game where Japan is already in check. If the plan works, Kurita's battleships and cruisers will smash into the American landing force at Leyte Gulf, destroying the thin-skinned transports and supply ships, cutting off the invasion, potentially altering the entire trajectory of the war. It is a desperate plan, a plan born of desperation, but it is the only plan left. For 3 days, nothing has gone according to that plan. On October 23rd, in Palawan Strait, the American submarines Dace and Data intercepted Kurita's force. The heavy cruiser Atago Kurita's flagship took 4 torpedo hits and sank in 18 minutes. Kurita was in the water, swimming, watching his flagship go down, before being rescued. The heavy cruiser Maya exploded and sank almost instantly. The heavy cruiser Takao was crippled and forced to turn back. 3 heavy cruisers lost before the battle had even properly begun, and Kurita himself nearly killed. The next day, October 24th, brought the air attacks in the Sibuyan Sea, wave after wave of carrier aircraft from Halsey's Task Force 38. The Musashi, pride of the Japanese fleet, became the focus of 5 separate strikes. Her crew fought with desperate courage. Her anti-aircraft batteries fired until their barrels glowed. But the attacks kept coming. Torpedoes in the bow, bombs on the deck, her speed dropping from 27 knots to 22, then to 16, then to 12. Her bow settling deeper and deeper into the water. Finally, at 19:35 hours, she rolled to port and disappeared, taking over 1,000 men with her. Kurita had ordered a temporary withdrawal. The attacks were too intense. His force was being destroyed piecemeal. Then, at 17:14 hours, he received new orders. Proceed with the operation. The southern force would attack through Surigao Strait that night. Ozawa's carriers had successfully drawn Halsey north. The way through San Bernardino Strait was open. So Kurita turned his force around once again and headed east through the strait in darkness. His men were exhausted. His ships had taken damage. His fuel situation was critical. But the mission remained. Reach Leyte Gulf and destroy the American invasion force. At 0100 hours on October 25th, his force emerged from San Bernardino Strait into the Philippine Sea. The strait had been unguarded, no American ships, no air attacks. It seemed impossible, but it was true. Halsey had taken his entire force north, chasing Ozawa's decoy carriers, leaving San Bernardino Strait unwatched. Kurita turned south, paralleling the coast of Samar, heading for Leyte Gulf. If his luck held, he would arrive at dawn and catch the American landing force before they could react. Instead, at 06:45 hours, his lookouts spotted something entirely unexpected. American aircraft carriers. Aboard the escort carrier Fanshawe Bay, Ensign Hans Jensen has been awake since 05:30 hours. The general quarters alarm had sounded in darkness, as it does every morning, calling the crew to battle stations for the dawn alert. This is standard procedure. Dawn and dusk are when submarines prefer to attack, when the light plays tricks on the eyes, when the sea and sky blur together. Jensen is 22 years old, from a small town in Minnesota that most people cannot find on a map. He has been in the Navy for 18 months. He is a pilot in Composite Squadron 68, flying a Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bomber. This morning, his aircraft is loaded with 4 500-pound general-purpose bombs and a single Mark 13 torpedo. The torpedo is practice-loaded, meaning it has no explosive warhead. His aircraft is configured for anti-submarine patrol, not for attacking surface ships. The Fanshawe Bay is one of 6 escort carriers in Task Unit 77.4.3, radio call sign Taffy 3. The carriers are arranged in a rough circle, about 2,500 yards apart, with their destroyer and destroyer escort screen on the perimeter. They are operating about 50 miles off the coast of Samar, providing close air support for the troops ashore at Leyte. The other carriers in Taffy 3 are the Streetlow, White Plains, Kalinin Bay, Kitkun Bay, and Gambia Bay. All of them are Casablanca-class escort carriers, mass-produced in shipyards that were building cargo ships just 2 years earlier. They are 512 feet long, with a flight deck just over 70 feet wide. They carry approximately 28 aircraft each, a mix of FM-2 Wildcat fighters and TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. The destroyer screen consists of 3 Fletcher-class destroyers, the Hole, Heerman, and Johnston, and 4 destroyer escorts, the Dennis, John C., Butler, Raymond, and Samuel B. Roberts. The destroyer escorts are even smaller than the destroyers, designed primarily for anti-submarine work, carrying only 2 5-inch guns each compared to the destroyer's 5. Taffy 3 is commanded by Rear Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague. He is 48 years old, a Naval Academy graduate who has spent most of the war doing exactly this kind of unglamorous support work, escorting convoys, providing air cover for amphibious operations, flying anti-submarine patrols. He is not commanding a fast carrier task force. He is not hunting the Japanese fleet. He is providing close air support for infantry units fighting in the jungle. At 06:45 hours, everything changes. A TBM Avenger on anti-submarine patrol reports enemy surface vessels to the north, multiple contacts, moving fast. The report is initially met with skepticism. They must be friendly ships. Perhaps Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet, returning from the north. Perhaps some of the vessels from Taffy 1 or Taffy 2, the other escort carrier units operating nearby. Then the pilot reports the vessels are firing at him. He can see the muzzle flashes. Large caliber shells. The pilot's voice is urgent, professional, but underneath there is something else. Fear? Confusion? He is being shot at by what he identifies as battleships and cruisers. Aboard the Fanshawe Bay, Admiral Sprague orders a course change to the southeast, toward the other Taffy units. He orders all carriers to launch aircraft immediately. Every plane that can fly, any armament. Just get them in the air. At 06:58 hours, massive splashes erupt in the water 400 yards astern of the White Plains. The shells are enormous, throwing up geysers of water dyed with brilliant colors: pink, red, yellow, green. The Japanese use dye in their shells, so each ship can track its own fall of shot. The effect is surreal, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. Sprague's radio operator confirms what the colored splashes already tell him. These are not friendly ships. These are Japanese battleships and cruisers, the largest surface warships in the world, and they are close enough to fire. The range is approximately 30,000 yards, 15 nautical miles. For the 18-inch guns of the Yamato, this is almost point-blank range. Sprague issues a series of orders in rapid succession. All carriers make smoke. Maximum speed, which for an escort carrier means 17 knots, perhaps 18 if the engineers can coax a little extra from the boilers. Launch all aircraft. Send out a distress call on all frequencies. Plain language. No code. We are under attack by Japanese surface forces. The destroyers and destroyer escorts receive their orders. Make smoke. Prepare for torpedo attack. In the radio room, the message goes out. Enemy surface force attacking from the north. Our position is 11 degrees north, 126 degrees 30 minutes east. Composition: 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, destroyers. The response from higher command is almost immediate, and it carries the weight of terrible realization. You are on your own. Admiral Halsey and the Third Fleet are 300 miles to the north, engaging Ozawa's decoy carriers. The Seventh Fleet's battleships are to the south, recovering from the night battle in Surigao Strait, where they have just destroyed Nishimura's southern force. There is no one close enough to help. Taffy 3 faces, the largest concentration of surface firepower in the Pacific Theater, with 6 escort carriers that were never meant to fight surface ships, and 7 escorts that weigh less collectively than a single Japanese. Battleship. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Ensign Jensen's aircraft is already on the catapult when the first shells land. The Fanshawe Bay shudders as her single 5-inch stern gun opens fire. The sound is sharp, percussive, utterly futile. A 5-inch gun firing at a battleship is like throwing pebbles at a tank. Launch all aircraft! Launch all aircraft! The order comes over the flight deck speakers. Jensen's Avenger is hurled forward by the catapult. He fights for altitude, his aircraft heavy with bombs and the practice torpedo. Around him, other aircraft are launching from all 6 carriers. There is no time for proper formation, no time for briefing, no time to arm the torpedoes properly or change out the anti-personnel bombs for armor-piercing weapons. The pilots simply launch, form up loosely, and turn toward the Japanese fleet. Jensen can see them now, massive shapes on the horizon, muzzle flashes rippling along their sides. The shells they fire are so large that he can actually see them in flight, dark blurs against the sky, falling toward the carriers in long, arcing trajectories. He counts the enemy ships, 4 battleships in a rough line, 6 heavy cruisers, multiple destroyers. It is the Imperial Japanese Navy's center force, virtually intact, bearing down on 6 escort carriers at maximum speed. Jensen looks at his fuel gauge, at his weapons status panel. He has 4 bombs meant for bunkers and lightly armored vehicles. He has a torpedo with no warhead. He has 6 50-caliber machine guns with ammunition meant for strafing ground targets. He has nothing that can seriously damage a battleship. And yet the order is clear. Attack. The initial 10 minutes of the battle unfold in a chaos that no amount of training could have prepared either side for. Aboard the Yamato, Admiral Kurita makes a decision that will be debated by naval historians for decades afterward. Instead of maintaining formation and using his superior speed to close the range systematically, he orders a general attack. Each ship is to proceed independently toward the enemy carriers. The order is born of urgency. The Americans are launching aircraft. Every minute that passes gives those aircraft more time to arm, to form up, to attack. Every minute that passes allows the carriers to generate smoke and turn into the wind and create the conditions for escape. But the order also sacrifices the fundamental advantage of a battle line. Concentrated fire. The Japanese ships begin to scatter, each captain choosing his own course, his own target. The cruisers, faster than the battleships, begin to pull ahead. The formation becomes ragged. The careful coordination that might have allowed them to annihilate the American force in minutes is lost. The Yamato begins firing her main battery at extreme range. The targeting is difficult. The range is opening as the Americans run southeast. The splashes are enormous, but they are not hitting. Not yet. The Japanese cruisers open fire with their 8-inch and 6-inch guns. They have a higher rate of fire than the battleships, and they are closing the range faster. The first hits begin to land on the American carriers within minutes. The Gambier Bay, the northernmost carrier in the American formation, takes an 8-inch shell in her engine room at 0750 hours. Her speed drops immediately from 17 knots to 11. She falls behind the other carriers, losing way, smoke pouring from her stern. The Kalinin Bay takes a shell through her hangar deck. The explosion kills 14 men instantly. Fires break out. Damage control parties rush forward with hoses, but the water pressure is erratic. The ship's steering is damaged. She begins to zigzag erratically. Admiral Sprague orders the carriers to turn into the wind and continue launching aircraft. This requires the carriers to briefly turn toward the enemy, presenting their sterns the most vulnerable angle to incoming fire. But there is no choice. Aircraft are still on the flight decks. They must launch or they will be destroyed before they can fight. The pilots who have already launched face an impossible situation. They have been trained to attack submarines and provide ground support. Their aircraft are loaded with weapons useless against heavy armor. They have no time to return to the carriers, land, rearm with proper anti-ship weapons, and launch again. The carriers are under direct fire. The flight decks are pitching violently as the ships maneuver. Landing is impossible, so they attack with what they have. The first strike reaches the Japanese formation at 07:20 hours. A dozen Wildcat fighters and Avenger torpedo bombers dive toward the battleship Congo. They drop their bombs' depth charges, anti-personnel clusters, a few general-purpose bombs, and they fire their machine guns. The bombs explode against the Congo's armored deck and superstructure, doing minimal damage. The machine gun bullets spark and ricochet off the armor plating. But the attack causes the Congo to turn hard to port, evading what her lookouts report as torpedoes. The turn takes the battleship out of position. The attack has bought time. Seconds, perhaps minutes. But time. Another group of Avengers makes a run on the heavy cruiser Haguro. They drop their torpedoes, practice torpedoes, training torpedoes. Torpedoes that cannot possibly sink a cruiser even if they hit. But the Japanese do not know they are practice torpedoes. The Haguro turns hard to comb the tracks, presenting her stern to the oncoming torpedoes, slowing her advance. Again and again, the American aircraft attack. When their bombs and torpedoes are exhausted, they make dry runs diving at the Japanese ships with empty bomb bays, forcing the enemy to maneuver, to turn away, to break formation. Some pilots discover that by flying low over the Japanese ships, they can force the anti-aircraft gunners to fire at such a low angle that they risk hitting their own ships. It is a desperate tactic, suicidal, but it works. The American pilots are inventing close air support doctrine on the fly, under fire, with weapons that were never meant for this purpose. Meanwhile, on the surface, the destroyer screen makes its own impossible choice. Commander Ernest E. Evans, captain of the destroyer Johnston, does not wait for orders. At 07:10 hours, with Japanese shells falling around the carriers, he turns his ship hard to port and increases to flank speed. He is heading directly toward the Japanese fleet. The Johnston is a Fletcher-class destroyer displacing 2,500 tons. She carries 5 5-inch guns and 10 21-inch torpedo tubes. She has been in commission for exactly 1 year. Her crew calls her the fightingest ship in the Navy, a nickname Evans has worked hard to earn. Evans is a Native American Cherokee from Oklahoma. He is one of the very few Native American officers in the United States Navy. When he took command of the Johnston in October 1943, he told his crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." Now, at 07:10 hours on October 25, 1944, he is living up to that promise. The Johnston charges toward the Japanese cruisers, her guns firing continuously. She closes to 10,000 yards, 5 nautical miles before launching her torpedoes. All 10 tubes. The torpedoes run hot and straight toward the heavy cruiser Kumano. One torpedo hits. The Kumano's bow is blown off. The cruiser slows, turns away, eventually drops out of the battle entirely, heading back toward San Bernardino Strait at reduced speed. But the Johnston has announced her presence. Every Japanese ship in the vicinity begins firing at her. She is hit by 3 14-inch shells from the battleship, Congo shells larger than telephone poles, each carrying nearly 1,500 pounds of high explosive. The hits are catastrophic. The Johnston's bridge is shattered. One shell penetrates the engine room, cutting the ship's speed in half. Her after-fire room is destroyed. Her gyro compass is knocked out. Her number 1 gun mount is torn from its foundation and thrown into the sea. Commander Evans is blown off his feet. Shrapnel tears into his left hand, nearly severing 2 fingers. His shirt is blown off his back by the blast, but he remains conscious. He stands. He continues issuing orders. The Johnston staggers out of formation, trailing smoke, her speed reduced to 17 knots. Her crew fights fires, patches holes, struggles to restore power. They have lost 45 men in those first hits. Their captain is wounded. Their ship is crippled. And yet Evans turns the Johnston around and re-enters the battle. The other destroyers follow the Johnston's lead. The Hole and Heermann launch their own torpedo attacks, closing to point-blank range against cruisers and battleships, firing their guns, drawing fire away from the carriers. The destroyer escorts smaller, lighter, carrying only two 5-inch guns and 3 torpedo tubes, each make their own runs. The Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer escort that displaces 1,200 tons and was never meant to engage surface warships, charges directly at the Japanese cruiser line. Her crew loads their 5-inch gun manually. When the automatic loading system fails, achieving a rate of fire the gun was never designed to maintain. They fire so rapidly that the barrel glows red. They hit the heavy cruiser Chikuma over 40 times, setting fires, destroying gun mounts, killing her executive officer on the bridge. The destroyer escort Dennis makes a solo torpedo run against the battleship Yamato herself. She closes to 4,500 yards, less than 2.5 miles, against the largest battleship ever built, fires her torpedoes, and somehow survives the return fire. The ferocity of the American destroyer attack disrupts the entire Japanese formation. Ships turn away to avoid torpedoes, breaking their pursuit of the carriers. Others concentrate fire on the destroyers, temporarily ignoring the carriers. The carefully planned destruction of the American force becomes a confused melee. And still the aircraft keep coming. By 0800 hours, more than 100 American aircraft are in the air over the battle. They come from Taffy 3, from Taffy 2 to the south, and from Taffy 1 even further south. Every escort carrier within range is launching everything that can fly. Many of the aircraft have no weapons at all. They have been caught on deck during rearming, or they have already expended their ordnance in earlier strikes. But they attack anyway. They make dry runs over the Japanese ships, sometimes as many as 8 or 10 runs in succession, forcing the enemy to maneuver, to break concentration, to believe they are under constant attack. One pilot, after exhausting his ammunition, resorts to throwing his plotting board, a piece of navigation equipment, at a Japanese cruiser as he flies over. Another pilot, out of bombs and torpedoes, flies so low over a Japanese battleship that his propeller wash disrupts the aim of her anti-aircraft gunners. These are not the tactics taught at Pensacola. These are not the coordinated strikes that sank the Musashi the day before. These are desperate men in obsolete aircraft, doing whatever they can to save their shipmates. And incredibly, impossibly, it is working. By 0830 hours, the battle has been raging for nearly 2 hours. The range between the Japanese battleships and the American carriers has closed from 30,000 yards to less than 20,000. The Yamato's 18-inch guns are finding their range. The cruisers are firing continuously, their salvos falling with increasing accuracy. The Gambier Bay, already crippled by her earlier hit, has fallen so far behind the other carriers that she is now isolated, surrounded by Japanese cruisers closing from 3 sides. The heavy cruisers, Chikuma, Tone, and Chokai, concentrate their fire on her. 8-inch shells tear through her thin hull plating as if it were paper. The Gambier Bay was never designed to take this kind of punishment. Her hull is a converted merchant vessel. Her armor is non-existent. She has a single 5-inch gun on her stern 1 gun to defend against 3 heavy cruisers, mounting a total of 24 8-inch guns and 28 5-inch guns. At 0850 hours, a shell penetrates the Gambier Bay's forward engine room. The explosion kills everyone in the compartment instantly. Her speed drops to 6 knots. She is dead in the water, listing, smoke pouring from multiple hits. Captain Walter Vuegg orders abandon ship at 0907 hours. The crew begins going over the side, jumping into the oil-slicked water, swimming away from the dying carrier. The Gambier Bay continues to take hits even as her crew abandons her. The Japanese cruisers fire at point-blank range, less than 5,000 yards. Every salvo hits. At 0911 hours, the Gambier Bay rolls to port and sinks, taking approximately 100 men with her. She is the first American aircraft carrier sunk by surface gunfire in the war. She will be the only fleet or escort carrier lost to surface action in the entire Pacific campaign. But her sacrifice has bought time. While the Japanese cruisers concentrated on destroying the Gambier Bay, The other 5 carriers have gained distance. They are making smoke, zigzagging, turning into and out of rain squalls. The destroyers and destroyer escorts continue their suicidal charges, drawing fire, disrupting the Japanese pursuit. The destroyer Hull has been under fire continuously since her initial torpedo run at 0730 hours. She has been hit more than 40 times by shells ranging from 5-inch to 16-inch. Her bridge is destroyed. Her main battery director is gone. 2 of her 5-inch mounts have been blown overboard. Her after-engine room is flooded. Her speed has been reduced to a crawl. Commander Leon S. Kintberger, her captain, continues fighting his ship even as she settles deeper into the water. The remaining gun crews fire manually, without directors, using open sights. They are aiming at battleships and cruisers at ranges where they can actually see the enemy crews on their decks. At 0855 hours, a salvo from a Japanese cruiser hits the Hull amidships, breaking her keel. She begins to break apart. Kintberger orders abandon ship. The survivors go into the water just as the Gambier Bay's crew is doing a few miles away. The Hull sinks at 0955 hours. Of her crew of 330 men, 253 are killed or die in the water before rescue arrives. The Samuel B. Roberts, the destroyer Escort that has been fighting as if she were a heavy cruiser, takes a massive hit at 0851 hours. A 14-inch shell from a Japanese battleship accounts differ on whether it was the Congo or Haruna strikes her directly in the engine room. The explosion literally lifts the entire stern of the ship out of the water. The after-engine room is obliterated. The entire after part of the ship is open to the sea. The Samuel B. Roberts loses all power. She loses steering. She is dead in the water with Japanese cruisers closing in. Her crew continues to fight, loading and firing the forward 5-inch gun manually, even as the ship lists heavily and begins to settle. Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland, her captain, orders abandon ship at 0935 hours. The Samuel B. Roberts sinks at 0955 hours, almost exactly the same time as the Hull. Of her crew of 178 men, 90 are killed. The destroyer Johnston, which has been fighting since 0710 hours, is still afloat, but barely. She has been hit so many times that survivors will later be unable to count all the shell holes in her hull. Her forward engine room is flooded. Her after engine room is destroyed. Her bridge has been hit multiple times. Her mast has been shot away. She has no power, no steering, no guns still firing. Commander Evans, wounded, burned, his uniform in tatters, stands on what remains of his bridge and watches Japanese destroyers closing in for the kill. The Johnston has fought for over 2 hours. She has fired every shell, launched every torpedo, exhausted every trick and tactic. There is nothing left. At 0945 hours, a Japanese destroyer closes to less than 2,000 yards and fires a full salvo into the Johnston's hull. The destroyer is followed by a cruiser that fires at point-blank range. The Johnston shudders under the impacts. She begins to roll to port. Evans orders abandon ship. The crew goes over the side. Many of them are injured. All of them are exhausted. They swim away from the ship as she continues to roll. At 10 to 10 hours, the Johnston capsizes and sinks. Commander Ernest Evans goes down with his ship. His body is never recovered. Of the Johnston's crew of 327 men, 186 are killed. As the Johnston sinks, a Japanese destroyer passes close by the survivors in the water. An officer on the destroyer's bridge witnesses will later report salutes the sinking American ship. It is a gesture of respect from one warrior to another, a recognition of courage in battle that transcends nationality. By 10:20 hours, 3 of the 7 American escorts have been sunk. 2 others are heavily damaged. 1 escort carrier has been lost. The remaining carriers are still under fire but have gained distance on the Japanese fleet. They are making 18 knots, pushing their engines beyond rated capacity. The rain squalls are providing intermittent cover. The air attacks are relentless. And then, at 10:25 hours, something extraordinary happens. Admiral Kurita orders his fleet to break off the attack and head north. The decision to withdraw is one of the most controversial in naval history. Kurita's fleet still outnumbers and outguns the Americans by an overwhelming margin. The American destroyers have been destroyed or crippled. The carriers are within range. Leyte Gulf, the ultimate objective, is less than 40 miles away. The American transports and supply ships are undefended. Everything the operation was meant to achieve is within reach. And Kurita orders his fleet to turn away. To understand this decision, we must understand what the battle looks like from the Japanese perspective at 10:20 hours on October 25, 1944. Kurita has been awake for over 30 hours. He has been under air attack almost continuously for 3 days. He watched his flagship sink beneath him in Palawan Strait. He watched the Musashi die under repeated airstrikes. He has lost 3 heavy cruisers, had another crippled and sent back. His force has been reduced by a third before even reaching the objective. Now, for nearly 3 hours, he has been engaged with what his intelligence officers initially identified as fleet carriers. The resistance has been unexpectedly fierce. American destroyers have made repeated torpedo attacks with a ferocity that none of his commanders anticipated. The air attacks have been continuous. His ships have been damaged. The heavy cruiser Chokai has been crippled by an air-launched torpedo and is falling behind. The heavy cruiser Kumano has lost her bow and has turned back. The heavy cruiser Suzuya has been hit repeatedly and is on fire. His fleet is scattered. The general attack order he issued at the battle's start has resulted in his ships pursuing individual targets with no coordination, no mutual support. The cruisers are miles ahead of the battleships. The destroyers are scattered across 20 miles of ocean. His force is strung out in a ragged line with gaps that make coordinated action impossible. And the air attacks keep coming, wave after wave. His lookouts are reporting dozens of aircraft at all times. His anti-aircraft ammunition is running low. His fuel situation is critical. He has been at sea for 6 days, much of it at high speed or in combat. His crews are exhausted. But there is something else. Something that will only become clear when American and Japanese records are compared after the war. Kurita believes he is fighting fleet carriers. His intelligence officers have told him these are the heavy carriers of Task Force 38. He has no way of knowing they are escort carriers. The Americans have been fighting with such determination, with such tactical skill, that the idea that they are merely a support force seems impossible. And if these are fleet carriers, if he has somehow stumbled upon a major American task force, then where is the rest of it? Halsey's Third Fleet consisted of multiple carrier task groups. Where are the battleships that should be screening these carriers? Where are the heavy cruisers? Where are the additional destroyers? Kurita's staff begins to worry that they are being drawn into a trap, that this is the bait, and that somewhere beyond the horizon, American battleships are maneuvering into position to cut off his retreat through San Bernardino Strait, that the air attacks will intensify, that his scattered, fuel-depleted, exhausted force will be caught between multiple American task forces and destroyed. None of this is true. But Kurita has no way of knowing it is not true. At 10:15 hours, Kurita's radio operators pick up a message from the heavy cruiser Tone. She has spotted multiple masts to the southeast. The report suggests major ships, possibly battleships. The composition is unclear. The report is almost certainly a misidentification. The masts are probably from one of the other Taffy units to the south, but combined with everything else, the fierce resistance, the continuous air attacks, the losses, the exhaustion, it tips the balance. Kurita makes his decision. He will break off the attack on the carriers. He will regroup his scattered fleet. He will then proceed to Leyte Gulf via a more northerly route, staying clear of what he believes might be a trap to the southeast. At 10:25 hours, he signals his fleet. All forces will cease action, proceed north and rendezvous. The Japanese ships begin to turn away. The battleships, which have been firing at extreme range for 3 hours, cease fire. The cruisers, some of them within visible range of the American carriers, break off their pursuit. The scattered fleet begins the difficult process of reforming into a cohesive force. Aboard the American carriers, the reaction is one of disbelief. The Japanese are turning away. The massive ships that have been closing in for 3 hours are turning north. The shell splashes, which have been getting closer and more accurate with each salvo, are falling further astern. Admiral Sprague watches through his binoculars as the Japanese fleet recedes toward the horizon. He does not understand why. He cannot believe they are actually withdrawing. He keeps expecting them to turn back, to resume the attack, to finish what they started. But they do not turn back. By 1100 hours, the Japanese fleet is out of range. The battle is over. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Sprague does not order a pursuit. His carriers are low on fuel, damaged, their aircraft operating at the limits of their range. His destroyer screen has been largely destroyed. He has lost 1 carrier and 3 escorts, with more ships damaged. He has survivors in the water. He has wounded to treat and dead to recover. The miracle is not that the Japanese withdrew. The miracle is that Taffy 3 still exists at all. The cost of the battle off Samar is measured in ships and men, but also in questions that will never be fully answered. The Gambier Bay is the only American fleet or escort carrier sunk by surface action in World War II. The destroyers Hole and Johnston and the destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts are lost. Over 1,000 American sailors are killed, another 1,000 are wounded or missing. The Japanese lose 3 heavy cruisers, the Chokai, Chikuma, and Suzuya, all sunk or scuttled after being crippled during the battle. The Kumano is crippled and will eventually be sunk by air attack days later. Hundreds of Japanese sailors are killed. But the real cost is strategic. Kurita's decision to break off the attack and head north costs his fleet precious hours. He spends those hours regrouping his scattered force, attempting to coordinate his movements, dealing with damaged ships and low fuel. By the time he turns south again toward Leyte Gulf, it is early afternoon. The element of surprise is gone. American aircraft from fields on Leyte itself are now attacking his force. Long-range bombers from other bases are arriving. The air cover he was promised from land-based aircraft never materializes. Those aircraft have been drawn off by other battles or destroyed on the ground or simply unable to find his fleet. At 1300 hours, Kurita receives reports of massive American carrier forces to the east. The reports are wrong. These are the same escort carriers he has just been fighting, now misidentified again, but they reinforce his concern about being caught in a trap. At 1500 hours, having made little progress toward Leyte Gulf and with fuel running dangerously low, Kurita makes his final decision: withdraw through San Bernardino Strait while the route is still open. The center force, which came within miles of destroying the American invasion fleet at Leyte Gulf, turns around and heads back the way it came. Operation Shogo has failed. The last major attempt by the Imperial Japanese Navy to alter the course of the war in a single decisive battle has ended in confusion, losses, and withdrawal. The Philippines will be retaken by American forces. The Japanese Navy will never again sortie in strength. The war will continue for another 10 months, but the outcome is no longer in doubt. In the years after the war, historians and naval analysts will scrutinize the battle off Samar with intense interest. The questions multiply with every examination of the records. Why did Kurita order a general attack instead of maintaining formation? The standard answer is urgency. He feared the carriers would escape before he could close the range. But the decision sacrificed his greatest advantage: coordinated fire from multiple battleships and cruisers. A disciplined approach might have allowed him to destroy all 6 carriers in the first hour of battle. Why did his gunnery, which should have been devastating at the ranges involved, prove so ineffective? The Yamato fired more than 100 main battery shells during the battle and achieved perhaps 1 or 2 hits. The cruisers fired thousands of rounds and sank only 1 carrier. Some analysts suggest the Japanese were too accustomed to firing at long range, where the shells followed high arcs. At closer ranges, the flatter trajectories required different calculations. Others point to the confusion of the general attack, with each ship selecting its own targets and tracking its own fall of shot with coloured dyes that became increasingly difficult to distinguish in the smoke and spray of battle. Why did Kurita believe he was fighting fleet carriers when the escort carriers were so obviously different in size and speed? The answer lies partly in intelligence failures and partly in the fog of war. Japanese intelligence had been tracking American carrier movements, but their information was incomplete and often wrong. In the heat of battle, with smoke obscuring visibility and his staff providing conflicting reports, Kurita made assumptions based on the ferocity of the defense rather than the actual composition of the enemy force. And the central question, debated more intensely than any other: why did Kurita withdraw when victory was within his grasp? The official Japanese explanation, provided in Kurita's own reports and in post-war interviews, emphasizes several factors: the scattered condition of his fleet, the fuel situation, the concern about being trapped, the continuous air attacks, the losses to his cruiser force, the exhaustion of his crews. But some historians see something else in the decision. They see an experienced commander who had been fighting a losing war for 3 years, who had watched ship after ship go down, who had been in the water himself when his flagship sank, who had seen the Musashi, a ship that was supposed to be unsinkable, destroyed by American air power. They see a man who had learned, perhaps too well, that the Americans always had more ships, more planes, more resources than Japanese intelligence estimated. When Kurita encountered resistance at Samar that seemed impossibly fierce for what should have been a small support force, he may have concluded that he was facing something larger than his intelligence had predicted. When the air attacks continued hour after hour, he may have calculated that this was only the beginning, that more carriers were nearby, that he was being drawn into exactly the kind of attritional battle that Japan could not win. In other words, Kurita may have withdrawn not because he underestimated the Americans, but because he had learned to respect their capabilities too much. The psychological impact of 3 years of defeat, of watching the Americans return stronger after every setback, may have made him see fleet carriers where there were only escort carriers, battleships where there were only destroyers, a trap where there was only desperate improvisation. The battle off Samar becomes, in this interpretation, a case study in how morale and perception can matter as much as firepower and numbers. The Americans fought as if they had a chance because they had no other choice. The Japanese withdrew because they had learned that, in this war, nothing was ever as simple as it appeared, and the Americans always had another trick, another force, another counterattack ready. The survivors of Taffy 3 spend hours, and, in some cases, days in the water before being rescued. The sea off Samar is warm, but it is also full of sharks, drawn by the blood and debris of the battle. Men cling to rafts, to debris, to each other. They watch their wounded shipmates die of their injuries. They watch others simply give up and slip beneath the surface. The rescue efforts are complicated by continuing Japanese air attacks. Kamikaze aircraft suicide planes, loaded with explosives, strike the escort carriers Street Low and Kitkun Bay, hours after the surface battle ends. The Street Low is hit by a Zero fighter that crashes directly into her flight deck. The planes bomb and the Street Low's own ordnance detonate in a massive explosion. The carrier sinks in 30 minutes, taking 114 men with her. It is the first time in the war that a ship has been sunk by a deliberate kamikaze attack. It will not be the last. For the men in the water from the sunken destroyers and destroyer escorts, rescue comes slowly. Some are picked up within hours. Others drift for 2 or 3 days before being found. Many die of wounds or exhaustion or exposure before help arrives. Ensign Hans Jensen, whose Avenger was one of the first aircraft to launch from the Fanshawe Bay, lands on a different carrier after the battle. His own ship is too damaged to recover aircraft. He has been in the air for over 3 hours, making repeated attacks on Japanese ships with weapons that barely scratched their armor. His fuel gauges read empty. He has no idea how his aircraft is still flying. When he climbs out of his cockpit, his legs barely support him. His hands are shaking so badly he cannot unbuckle his parachute harness. A deck crew member has to help him. He walks to the carrier's island and looks back toward where the battle was fought. There is nothing but empty ocean and smoke on the horizon. Commander Evans's body is never recovered. He is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest military decoration. The citation reads, in part, "Outgunned and outmaneuvered, he unhesitatingly took on a Japanese task force. The valiant fighting spirit of the commanding officer and his men was an inspiration to all who witnessed their heroic stand." The Johnston receives a Presidential Unit citation. She is one of only 2 destroyers in the entire war to receive this honor for a single action. The Samuel B. Roberts is often called the destroyer Escort that fought like a battleship. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander Copeland, will later say, "We had nothing to be ashamed of. We fought our ship to the last gasp." The survivors of these ships, and of the Hole and the Gambia Bay, will spend the rest of their lives trying to explain what happened off Samar on October 25, 1944. They will attend reunions. They will tell their stories to historians and journalists and their grandchildren. They will try to make sense of how they survived when so many of their shipmates did not. Many of them will say that they do not remember being afraid during the battle itself. There was too much to do. Too many decisions to make. Too much happening too fast. The fear came later, in the water, or on the rescue ships, or in the nights afterward when they would wake up and remember. Admiral Sprague will write in his action report, "The failure of the enemy to completely wipe out all vessels of this task unit can be attributed to our successful smokescreen, our torpedo counterattack, and the definite partiality of Almighty God." The battle off Samar reveals something profound about warfare that transcends the specific details of ships and guns and tactics. It reveals that material superiority, while important, is not always decisive. That courage and determination can make up for deficiencies in firepower and armor, at least for a time. That confusion and psychological pressure can cause even a superior force to hesitate, to doubt, to withdraw when victory seems assured. The irony at the heart of this battle is that both sides acted based on misperceptions. The Americans fought as if they had a chance because they did not fully understand how hopeless their situation was. The Japanese withdrew because they believed the American force was larger and more dangerous than it actually was. In those 10 minutes before the aircraft launched, those crucial 10 minutes when Kurita was making his decision to order a general attack, when the American lookouts were trying to identify the shapes on the horizon, when Ensign Jensen was being strapped into his Avenger with weapons that could not sink a battleship, the entire battle was already being shaped by choices made under incomplete information and extreme pressure. Kurita chose speed over coordination, hoping to close the range before the Americans could launch a devastating strike. He scattered his fleet in the process, sacrificing the very advantage that might have allowed him to quickly destroy the American carriers. Sprague chose to run southeast, toward the other Taffy units, hoping for support, keeping his carriers out of range as long as possible. He ordered his destroyers to attack, knowing it was likely a death sentence for those ships, but that it might save the carriers. The destroyer captains chose to charge battleships and cruisers, with ships designed to hunt submarines, turning their weakness, small size, light armor, into a tactical advantage by closing to ranges where their torpedoes might be effective and where the Japanese guns had trouble tracking such small, fast targets. The pilots chose to attack with whatever weapons they had, or with no weapons at all, because not attacking meant watching their shipmates die without fighting back. Every choice was made with incomplete information. Every choice involved risk. Every choice could have ended in disaster. And yet, collectively, these choices added up to something remarkable. They added up to 6 escort carriers surviving when they should have been destroyed. They added up to a Japanese fleet, far superior in every measurable category, withdrawing from a battle it was winning. The 10 minutes before those first aircraft launched were not the decisive moment of the battle. The decisive moments were spread across 3 hours of continuous combat, across hundreds of individual decisions made by sailors and officers on both sides. But those 10 minutes set the conditions for everything that followed. They were the moment when the possible outcomes began to narrow, when the forces were set in motion that would determine who lived and who died, who won and who lost. In the decades after the war, the Battle off Samar becomes a case study taught at naval academies around the world. Not because it was the largest naval battle of the war, it was not. Not because it involved the most advanced technology, it did not. but because it demonstrates, in the clearest possible terms, that battles are won by men, not machines. That psychology and morale and determination matter as much as armor and guns. The battle is studied for what it reveals about command decisions under pressure. Kurita's order for a general attack is analyzed as an example of how urgency can override doctrine, how the fear of losing an opportunity can lead to sacrificing coordination. Sprague's decision to fight rather than surrender is studied as an example of refusing to accept defeat even when the situation appears hopeless. The battle is studied for what it reveals about small unit tactics. The destroyer attacks are analyzed as examples of how smaller forces can disrupt larger ones through aggressive action. The repeated air attacks, even with inadequate weapons, are studied as examples of how persistence can achieve results that individual strikes cannot. And the battle is studied for what it reveals about the fog of war. Both sides operated under significant misunderstandings about what they were facing. Both sides made decisions based on incomplete or incorrect intelligence, and yet both sides fought according to their understanding of the situation with complete commitment. The Japanese believed they were fighting a major American task force and withdrew to avoid what they saw as a potential trap. The Americans believed they had no choice but to fight, and so they fought with everything they had. Neither side fully understood the situation they were actually in, and that lack of understanding, paradoxically, may have saved the American force and doomed the Japanese operation. There is a final irony to the Battle of Samar that takes years to fully appreciate. The battle was part of Operation Shogo, Japan's attempt to destroy the American landing force at Leyte Gulf and potentially change the course of the war. The operation failed. The landings continued. The Philippines were retaken. The war moved inexorably toward its conclusion. But the failure at Samar was not primarily a failure of ships or guns or tactics. It was a failure of perception and psychology. The Japanese had the firepower to win. They had the opportunity. What they did not have was the certainty that they could win, because 3 years of war had taught them that the Americans always had more, always came back stronger, always had another force waiting beyond the horizon. The Americans at Samar fought as if they could win because they had no other choice. The Japanese at Samar withdrew despite having the advantage because they had learned too well what the cost of victory might be. In those 10 minutes before the aircraft launched, before the destroyers charged, before the first shells fell, the battle's outcome was still uncertain. But the conditions that would determine that outcome were already in place. The American determination to fight, the Japanese exhaustion after 3 years of war, the confusion and misidentification that would plague both sides, the courage of men in small ships facing impossible odds. The Battle of Samar lasted approximately 3 hours, but its significance extends far beyond those 3 hours, far beyond the ships sunk and the men killed. It stands as a reminder that battles are not won solely by those with the biggest guns or the heaviest armor. They are won by those who refuse to give up, who find ways to fight, even when the odds are hopeless, who make the enemy doubt and hesitate and ultimately withdraw. And it stands as a testament to the men who fought there, American and Japanese, survivors and those who died, who faced their duty with courage, even when that courage could not guarantee victory or survival. The 6 escort carriers of Taffy 3 steamed away from the battle that October morning, damaged but intact, their crews exhausted but alive. The Japanese center force withdrew through San Bernardino Strait, its mission incomplete, its losses mounting. And the war continued, as wars do, until one side could no longer continue fighting. But for those who were at Samar on October 25, 1944, the memory of that morning remained crystal clear. The moment when they looked out and saw battleships on the horizon, the moment when they realized no one was coming to save them, the moment when they decided to fight anyway. Those moments, and the 3 hours that followed, defined them for the rest of their lives. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.